In the middle of downtown Halifax is one of the town's old graveyards. Well, I should say it's the new old graveyard. This is Camp Hill Cemetery, and in the very front row of the cemetery are two of the earliest burials. We're looking at two graves from the wreck of the SS Atlantic, although you're only actually seeing one. This stone marks the grave of Atlantic's purser, Ambrose Worthington. Worthington was born in Fleetwood, England in 1849, making him 24 years old instead of the 23 listed on his tombstone. He was close friends with the Ismay family, who gave him this job with the White Star Line, where he managed the ship's finances during a voyage and oversaw the passengers' experiences. Aboard Atlantic, his office was just aft of the first-class dining saloon on the port side, adjacent to the ship's bar. His story during the sinking of Atlantic on the rocks of Nova Scotia on April 1, 1873 is not well known, but we do know that he made it out on deck. He was battered by waves into the ship's railing, where his body became lodged. His body was found in the aftermath, and his burial was paid for by Thomas Ismay himself. This is the grave of 2nd Officer Henry Metcalf, officer on watch at the time of Atlantic's demise. Metcalf was lost in the sinking and never got to tell his side of the story, but historians look at him as one of the people most at fault for the disaster. Henry Ismay Metcalf was cousins with Thomas Ismay and had lost his mariner's certificate around 1872 when he was in command of a ship that ran down another vessel, sinking it. He was given a second chance by his cousin, owner of the White Star Line, and was placed aboard Atlantic. During the crossing, Atlantic's captain believed he was running low on coal and diverted from his regular route to the New Jersey side of the New York harbor, and instead turned to Halifax, Nova Scotia to resupply. In doing so, a miscalculation of the tides led them to be 12 miles off course. At midnight, Atlantic was approaching the rocky coastline. The captain calculated that they would be just offshore at 3 a.m. and asked Officer Metcalf to wake him at that hour. Then he retired for a nap. Metcalf chose not to wake the captain, even past 3 a.m., and even prevented the captain's steward from waking him when he tried to. Instead, the ship continued on at full speed into the night. Just after 3, under Metcalf's watch, Atlantic struck the rocks and was wrecked. A disaster that would have been prevented had Metcalf woken the captain as ordered. We will never know why he defied these orders. Metcalf was in charge of loading one of the lifeboats during the sinking, but as he began lowering, the order for evacuation was rescinded. The water was simply too dangerous for the lifeboats, and the captain determined it was safest to stay aboard the stranded vessel. Metcalf again defied these orders and continued lowering his lifeboat, with himself in it along with several other men, women, and children, but the boat was smashed by a wave against the hull of the ship, killing all on board. Metcalf's body was found in the aftermath and recovered. Out of respect for the dead, as Metcalf was the only deck officer killed in the sinking, the court inquiries defended him and more or less exonerated him. He was buried here in Camp Hill Cemetery in a funeral that was either paid for by Thomas Ismay, by Captain Williams of the Atlantic, or by both. There are records indicating that Captain Williams paid for an ornate tombstone to be placed on Metcalf's grave, but nobody knows what happened to it. It's been said that there are 4 other burials from the Atlantic disaster in Camp Hill Cemetery, but I've looked at the burial records for the cemetery and cannot confirm this. For a full telling of the story of the Atlantic disaster, you can find several documentaries on my personal YouTube channel, Part-Time Explorer, including an old one which I made in 2018, and a larger production published only recently for the 150th anniversary, which includes the animations that you saw in this video. To help keep the story of these old ships alive, consider a membership to the Titanic International Society at the link below. They offer a quarterly publication filled with articles written by historians, and their most recent edition is dedicated to the SS Atlantic disaster.